The truce signed by Khosrow and Justinian in 532 CE had no expiration date. This peace was meant to last forever. But after that nonsense the Romans had pulled with that barbarian adoption proposal, Khosrow knew better than to trust them. Justinian had been meddling in his affairs, and Khosrow had proof. His loyal Arabic ally to the south had sent Khosrow a copy of a letter he'd received from Justinian, promising him gold if he would switch to Justinian's side. Then a group of Turks had arrived in Khosrow's court, with another letter that they claimed Justinian had sent, telling them that Rome would be grateful if they invaded Iran and created some havoc. Khosrow sent copies of these letters back to Justinian and warned him that if this behavior continued, their treaty was over. But Justinian denied everything. Hey, K-man, these letters aren't real, chill out. Yet the hits kept on coming. Envoys from the Visigoths stumbled into Khosrow's court, begging for help against Romans who had been beating them up over in Italy. They said, "Do you really think that a man as greedy and ambitious as Justinian won't try to conquer your country as soon as he's done conquering ours?" They urged Khosrow to strike, right now, while the Romans were still tied down in the west. News of Justinian's abuses also trickled in from Lesser Armenia, where the Romans had begun demanding taxes so high that the Armenians rose in revolt. The first Roman general sent to quell them tried to turn them against each other, only to screw it up and get killed in the first major battle. The second Roman general lured the Armenians into a parley, before treacherously killing their ambassador. The Armenians fled to Khosrow's court and begged him to help. Peace treaty or no, this had gotten out of hand. Khosrow asked a Zoroastrian fire temple to check the auspices for him, see if God would support him making war on the Romans. The fire temple said, yep. Which is no surprise. Historically, God generally tends to agree with kings, at least when they ask their priests nicely. And that was good because with this, Khosrow could assure his court that he wasn't breaking a treaty. No. He was leading a holy war. See, throughout this entire period of peace, Khosrow had been getting ready for this. After that adoption insult and the wrench Justinian threw into his succession, are you kidding me? Khosrow was primed for revenge. But he wasn't just gonna beat Justinian. Oh, no. He was going to humiliate Justinian, and have himself a good old time doing it. Khosrow swept into Roman territory at the head of a giant army, signaling that the eternal peace had officially expired. Eternity, it turns out, is really just about 8 years long. But he had to move quickly because Justinian's army would not be stuck out in Italy forever, and fighting an army is way less fun than sacking an undefended countryside. So rather than taking the time to lay siege to every single town he came across, Khosrow gave them a simple choice. Just surrender and pay me a bribe, or I will kill every single one of you. One town chose to resist. After that, the other towns did not. Khosrow took that city bribe money and then used it to bribe Justinian's army. The soldiers appointed to the east had been complaining for years about how underpaid they were, and now here was the Shah of Iran offering them money and glory by the handful. Roman deserters poured into Khosrow's army. This lightning campaign through eastern Rome had one goal in sight: Antioch, the wealthiest and largest of Justinian's cities in the east. Ever since an earthquake struck just a few years prior, Justinian had poured vast amounts of gold into rebuilding and restoring its former glory. So naturally, when Khosrow swept into the city and they refused to pay his bribe, he knocked down every single building, except for the church, enslaved the inhabitants, and went on his way. Justinian was reeling, and now the quick capture of Antioch had him on the ropes. The Western troops he'd been counting on had been delayed by a stubborn general pursuing personal glory over in Rome. With no army coming to his aid and cities falling left and right, Justinian did the only thing he could. He sent envoys to beg for peace. The envoys told Khosrow that breaking their treaty was kind of a jerk move. What had Rome ever done to deserve such treachery? Khosrow showed them the letters Justinian had sent to his allies, trying to turn them against him. And the envoys were like, all right. Yeah, that makes sense. Look, how about we give you a whole bunch of money, plus a nice big yearly tribute if you will just knock it off and go away. Khosrow agreed, and sent them running back to Justinian. Now, the Romans believed that this new treaty began the moment Khosrow said yes, but it turns out, no. As far as Khosrow was concerned, the treaty wasn't official until the Romans paid up, and until that happened, he was gonna turn his campaign up to 11. Now, instead of capturing Roman cities, Khosrow began turning them into his own private resorts. He marched all the way to the Mediterranean Sea just so he could swim in its waters like the great shahs of Iran's ancient past, sending Justinian a reminder of just how far Khosrow had come and how little Justinian could do to stop him. Then, Khosrow took over a town and paid them to stage a special day of chariot races, just for him. And he happened to know that Justinian was a mega fan of the blue racing faction, so Khosrow fixed the races to make sure that the blues suffered an embarrassing loss to the rival greens. He went on like this from town to town, demanding tribute from everybody and making Justinian look like a fool. He even took another swing at trying to capture Dara, that old sore spot between Iran and Rome, although once again Dara survived the attack. Then, finally, Justinian's stubborn general returned from the west with his main army, and Justinian was like, okay, screw your treaty, we are doing this. Now, Khosrow still had all the people he'd enslaved back at Antioch, and he'd kind of been counting on this treaty as an opportunity to sell them back to Justinian, but now he was stuck with them. After giving it some thought, he decided that he would take them back to Iran and build them a new town. Resettling captives from defeated cities was an old Iranian tradition. It was a great way to add a bunch of talented craftsmen to your population. Many shahs before Khosrow had done exactly that. But our Khosrow, he liked to go above and beyond. He named his new city Antioch Khosrow, which translates to Khosrow's better Antioch. He recreated that city down to the smallest detail, from the layout of the streets to the number of rooms in each house. Even the building materials were the same. Then, Khosrow freed the captive Antiochians and sent them to live in their new city. They were astounded. Khosrow asked one random citizen if he was happy to see his house again, and the man replied, "Oh yes, this looks exactly like it. Although, I do miss that mulberry tree that used to be in my front yard." The next morning, the man woke up to find a mulberry tree planted in his front yard. Khosrow's message to Justinian was clear. Your soldiers choose me. Your towns choose me, and your people choose me. Get wrecked, son! Justinian now had his army back, but Khosrow still had him outnumbered. For a while, the Romans attempted small raiding expeditions, staying very, very far away from any direct confrontation. That wouldn't do. Khosrow gathered his army and marched on Jerusalem, prepared to take the battle directly to Justinian's face. But while he was still marching to Antioch, a dark shadow crept into his army. Khosrow's men began to burst out in boils. Their skin decayed. They began to vomit blood. A plague from the land of Egypt had stretched out its hand and brushed both armies with decrepit fingers. The Romans shrank back into their cities. Khosrow and his army retreated north, looking for sanctuary, but the disease had already swept through his ranks. And worse, it had even closed its grip around Khosrow himself.